My guest today is a retired Houston, Texas detective, formerly of the Houston PD. I'm pleased to welcome to the program for the first time, John Shirley. John, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Jason. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Delighted to have you today. And
Thank
John,
you.
of course, you're one of my very favorite types of guests. You started out as a viewer of Crowdsource the Truth, and you were compelled by the material that you saw to call and become a participant. So I really want to thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank you for your patience with me. It's been some time that you and I have been in communication, and I'm a little sometimes hard to get through to. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
So John, you've prepared a system that is intended to assess and mitigate violence in schools. And this is a big issue, of course. We've just had another school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas. What can you tell us about the system that you've developed?
Well, let me start with a bit of my background, so it will give me some kind of a right to speak on the topic. I spent 20 years with the Houston Police Department. About half of that was in full-time investigations. I spent time in the homicide division. I did internal affairs investigations, and I finished my career in the financial crimes unit. I'm a certified fraud examiner, and I've done all kinds of jobs in the police department in a 20-year time span. So I've dealt with violent situations. I haven't dealt specifically with a school violence situation, but we did get quite a bit of training near the end of my career on dealing with school violence, at least from a tactical perspective.
Right.
I've been retired for about 3 years. I own my own investigative firm, and I'm based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This topic is especially close to my heart. My wife is a teacher and has been for over 20 years, and I see the reports of the violence going on in schools, and it's awful and terrible, and unfortunately it often gets thrown into the political realm. Instead of dealing truly with solutions, it becomes just an argument back and forth between the two different sides of the political coin. And so over the last probably 3 to 4 months, I've put my head to it and tried to come up with a solution. And I see thus far, even though we have these school shootings, it seems like several times a year with multiple casualties, it seems like everybody wants to deal with, or the only talk about solutions has to do with hardening the schools, arming the teachers, metal detectors, more school police officers. And while I see those steps as part of a solution, I really think it fails to take kind of the holistic view of why aren't we taking more steps to avoid these violent confrontations in the first place? And so from that angle, I've come up with this program, and it's just really in its infancy, but I'm hoping to roll it out fully over the next month or two, to deal with it from a view to avoid the confrontation in the first place.
I like that. It makes a lot of sense.
And what brought me to this place is that it seemed like pretty much every time we have a school shooting or a school violent confrontation, in the aftermath of the confrontation, after all the crying is done, or really sometimes when the crying is being done, we start getting information from various sources, either other students, from their online profile, from teachers, from mental health professionals, from the police, that this person was having issues and problems and has been in crisis for an extended period of time. I think the problem thus far has been there's been no coordination of all the different people that can be involved with this person outside the school setting. Yes, the school is important because the students spend lots of time there, but there's no coordination between the school and necessarily the police department, especially because not all schools have school resource officers that are there on campus, or the mental health professionals that the person is dealing with or have something to say, or even the prosecutors who would be prosecuting these crimes in the future. And so my program aims to take all these people and pull them together to work as one cohesive unit whenever a threat has been identified. Now, there are kind of two phases to my program. One is kind of a threat monitoring phase, and the second phase is kind of a threat assessment and mitigation phase. Mm-hmm. And so I'll start out with the school monitoring phase. Law enforcement and really all the other public service sector people that deal with these problems, they have limited resources. They've got set budgets or budgets that don't grow very, very much, ever increasing expectations on not only the scope of their work, but they never give them extra money to get more resources or more training. Everything is pretty much set for the most part, at least until one of these issues happens locally. On top of that, you have an information overload. In 2018, there's a Pew Research study that said that 94% of school-age kids are actively on social media and online. And if you look at the 2010 census, that means there are almost 70 million, or at this point, over 70 million people of student age that are actively engaged in social media. There's no way for that to be monitored without some kind of cohesive plan. A lot of schools will have, tip lines or an email address that someone can send a tip to, but they're not generally marketed very well. In fact, in my own district, I didn't even know there was a tip line until I started doing this program and did some research and found it in an obscure location on their website. So there's just no coordinated monitoring of what's going on. On top of that, there's definitely no coordinated and effective collection of the information. And when I say collecting the information, I'm not just looking at a weird Facebook photo that shows, as in the shooting at Santa Fe, a trench coat with all kinds of what I would consider potentially disturbing, badges and medals and stuff pinned to it. But, text message, screenshots of text messages, things like that could be gathered and put in a cohesive fashion and tracked over a long period of time. Students are in school till they're 18 years old, and most of the time, these students don't all of a sudden one day pick up a gun and start shooting people. Usually the schools have problems with them for an extended period of time. In fact, the shooter in Santa Fe, the shooter in Santa Fe was known as, it was going to be the school shooter kid. That was one of his nicknames.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't remember where I saw that, but if you Google it, this kid was a well-known time bomb waiting to go off. And so
I find that to be a shocking and sad. I've heard other people say that, like calling someone a high school shooter is kind of like a common joke nowadays among high school students. But this New York Times article is showing some of this is a video here from the New York Times showing some of what you're talking about, this kid's social media stuff. He's got a pentagram on his Facebook page, which obviously Quinn Michaels and I have been looking a lot into some of that imagery. This looks like satanic stuff. I haven't really gotten that much into the Santa Fe shooting. It looks like he's got some sort of bisexual pride thing on his hat. But John, I just wonder, some of the stuff that you're talking about sounds a little bit invasive of the privacy of these students.
Well, the way I look at it is nobody's proactively going out there and hunting down this information. That's not the intent. The intent would be when someone perceives a threatening, photo or post or a statement in the hallway, it would be passed on through this monitoring program to then be collated, not to immediately jump on the person or to immediately contact law enforcement. In fact, quite the opposite. It would be to take kind of a step back view of you're just monitoring what's going on, and actions would only be taken if over the period of time of monitoring something came to a head, something that would cause action. And to me, one of the good side benefits of this program is so many times, and it's happened locally here in North Texas several times just in the past couple of months, where you have what ended up being hoax threats, but because of the nature of the threat and the sensitivity that we have right now in our country about school violence,
Yeah.
these kids are not going to have, a criminal record that follows them the rest of their life, or potentially the rest of their lives. So the program,
people doing the hoaxes, you mean?
Right. So this would not only serve to stop the violence, but also it would serve to act as a mediation plane to keep potential hoaxers from going to the point where they commit a crime.
Right.
And so that's why, is in some way, is this in some way Big Brother? Well, maybe a little bit, but you know what? We're talking about minors, and just like every parent is expected to monitor their own kid if they're a reasonable parent,
right.
This is just taking another step to help monitor a youth, who doesn't have a developed brain, who isn't a voting age, full-righted citizen. And like I said, the goal is to avert these problems.
Right.
And so the program, as it's designed, would be monitoring any submitted information. We'd be first setting up communication points for students to students and others to contact the program, and then marketing those contact points in the schools so that it's well known. Everybody knows if somebody says something crazy or stupid, maybe I should report that. Okay.
Right.
From there, the data would be collected, collated, and tracked, and looking for trends. You're looking for relative baseline behavior or potential ramping up behavior or trigger point behavior that would then alert you to a potential imminent threat that you could actually take some action. And that anywhere in the process, you could have school counselors, public mental health people, potentially law enforcement step in advance.
Right.
In if nothing else, to scare anything but very determined shooter to maybe rethink their actions or get them help through the mental health process.
Yeah. Well, let me just interject here. Dalen Borden here in the comments on YouTube is saying that the attack in Texas lasted for 33 minutes. Now, I know you're a longtime viewer of the show, so I'm sure you're aware of my perception of this recurrence of the number 33. I like what you're saying to the extent that, of course, none of us want school violence. I recall quite clearly, I think it was 1996 or 7, when the Columbine shooting occurred. That was certainly the first large-scale, kind of mass high school shooting that I was aware of, and I was appalled. I mean, when you look back at 1996 now, anything pre-9/11, 2001, we were all sort of living in a more innocent world, and I think I just sort of feel like after 9/11 that virtually nothing shocks me, and it's a sad state of affairs, but we hear about these high school shootings and they've just become so common that we are obviously desensitized to them as compared to how an individual might have felt in 1996 hearing about Columbine, which to me at the time was the most unthinkable, horrendous, like, how could this possibly happen? It's a regular occurrence now. They're like bi-weekly almost. So of course we want to prevent them, but this person Dalen bringing up the 33-minute attack, to what extent, John, and maybe this is a bit of a non sequitur question, but to what extent do you feel that these attacks are false flags, to the extent that someone is doing them for a greater purpose and then planting someone like this kid Demetros, whatever his name is, as the patsy, as it were, or maybe putting him up to doing it and creating this event for some broader purpose? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I'm going to answer like I answer a question like this when I've been on the witness stand in court.
Yes.
Anything is possible, or most things are possible, or even plausible.
Right.
But what I say is, with a lack of any direct evidence to that effect, and I'm a skeptic. That doesn't mean that I think it's impossible.
Right.
I'm skeptical at this point. Now, what I think an ongoing issue a real ongoing issue may be, is a continued failure of law enforcement to actively engage
Yeah.
an imminent threat in an active shooter situation. And Columbine, coming from a law enforcement background, Columbine was kind of a sea change in law enforcement theory, a law enforcement procedure. Before Columbine happened, the training was in an active shooter situation to stay outside and
Why?
wait what because the overwhelming opinion was your normal line trained officer did not have the specialized training to engage in active threat. The training was set a perimeter and wait for SWAT. Okay.
Uh-huh.
In retrospect, now looking from 2015 back to the late 90s, that seems ridiculous.
Right.
And it seems like malfeasance on the part of law enforcement, but that was the law enforcement theory. You've got these specially trained SWAT guys who have all the tactical gear and the specialized tactical training to engage these targets.
Right.
Now, generally speaking, following Columbine, the training changed 180 degrees from that. It went from stand back and wait for SWAT to immediately attack the target.
Right.
I think a lot of this was based upon the fact that evidence has shown that in active shooter situations, the more quickly someone confronts the shooter, the more quickly they either kill themselves or the shooting stops because whoever confronted them is making them stop.
Right.
So the training shifted, and I think what we're still seeing among some departments is not fully embracing that shift, even though we're 20 plus years down the road. Because there's no unified overall nationwide training regimen, which actually I'm glad there's not, because I do like local control. The unfortunate part of that is that some of the breaking trends in training in law enforcement and law enforcement concepts, it takes it a while to filter all the way down to all the departments. And I think especially when you're talking about school police, school resource officers, I think a lot of times those officers are kind of forgotten when it comes to keeping their training completely up to date and on point. Because for a school district, their school police department is not the #1 priority. In a large major police department, generally speaking, training is a serious priority and is taken with a little more seriousness. That's my personal opinion and from my experience, what I've seen. So I think the problems that you had, I guess here, the 33-minute thing here is news to me. I didn't realize it was that long. But if you talk about that and the obvious issues that occurred in the Parkland shooting in Florida several months ago, or however long ago that was, it seems like several months. I think it's an unfortunate, very unfortunate. Hold on just 1 second.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, that these training procedures and everything, obviously, it's just like before 9/11, the attitude was when the plane gets hijacked, just like do whatever they say and try to get the plane landed, and that's out the window. So as it turns out, Columbine, I remembered incorrectly, it occurred in 1999, and I'm actually looking right now at, an article that I brought up here. And I mean, I've become very in tune with some of this stuff from working with Quinn Michaels, and I'm sure you've seen those shows. We can see that approximately 11:19 a.m. This began, and Quinn would tell us that 3 1s and a 9 is an encoded 9-3. Skeptics would say that I can find these sort of coded messages in all kinds of things if I look for them hard enough. But it's interesting to me how I didn't realize that this was 1999. It seems much closer to September 11th than I had recalled. And I just can't help but wonder if we haven't been collectively as a society in the United States been experiencing a number of terrorist attacks that maybe originate from somewhere other than where we're led to believe, to keep us afraid, to militarize the police, to increase spending for the military-industrial complex, to strip away our rights. Obviously, everyone is under surveillance now in a way that April 20th, 1999, I don't believe we were. We've lost a lot of our constitutional rights in the past 20 years since this occurred. And while I do support your efforts to curtail school shooting, I just become fearful that we might not be starting down a slippery slope of, well, these people are 16, 17, 18, they don't fully have rights. I'm not sure I agree with that, but we start spying even more on teenagers and people who are entering adulthood. It just seems to be a dangerous way to go, particularly if it's shown to be effective. Why wouldn't they start using that on the general public? And it becomes this sort of precog, pre-crime sort of thing that we've heard people like Ole Damagard speak about, that perhaps these events have been occurring repeatedly so that there is a groundswell for this type of monitoring on students and teenagers in high school. What do you think about that possibility, John?
Well, I draw a very dark line between monitoring of underage individuals and monitoring by the government everybody. I'm a civil libertarian. I take my rights very seriously, and I'm very weary and suspicious of government overaction and government snooping.
Right.
So I don't come from this from the direction of I'm all on board with all the laws that have come to pass since 9/11. I have serious issues with lots of it. This is a very specific program targeting a very specific issue, and I would not feel comfortable, and I would have serious problems if a program like this were to be expanded out to a pre-crime, thought police. To me, the striking difference to this is I don't want to get the government involved. I want to be able to monitor this stuff, and I want to be able to take action inside the school setting by counselors or talking to parents, helping them get help in the mental health realm, instead of immediately going to the police.
I agree with that. I think parents need to be the first line of defense, and I think we're living in a society and a world where all of us are subjected to constant chemical assault, not to go too far down the road of aerosolized or aerosol spraying, whatever Clapper or Brennan was talking about when he spoke about that, but just the food, the industrialized nature of the way chickens and cattle and milk and everything that we're eating. I think that young people today are being bombarded with chemicals and electromagnetic radiation that I'm sure more students are, medicated right now than they were when I was a kid or you were a kid. I mean, I went to public school, and the idea that someone would walk into the school with a gun and start shooting was like, I think it might have been easier to conceive of Martians landing, but this is something that's happening day to day. So I think you're definitely on to something with raising awareness and having these tip lines and allowing the system to kind of monitor itself. If everybody in the school knows that this kid is, most likely to be school shooter, or he's, nominated for crazy person at the prom, that's something that should be shared, but then it also opens the door to bullying, and we see cyber harassment happening more and more. Even among adults, we have cyber harassment handling. So this is a very thorny issue to tackle. Raising awareness among parents and teachers seems like absolutely the best idea. You pointed out that there's a tip line that you weren't even aware of, so raising awareness definitely seems like something that needs to happen.
Correct, and it's a multi-pronged approach. To me, you only bring in law enforcement when you actually have what I would be considered a credible threat. If you've got a student that's in crisis and, for lack of a better term, exhibiting obvious antisocial behavior, you call in the parent for a parent conference, you call in the school counselors, you get them help, because we want to avoid it. We want to avoid it going down that road to where there's a violent issue. And honestly, a good a side benefit to this program is, we have a serious problem with suicides among students today. The suicide rate is horrible, and it's not unusual in major cities on a regular basis to hear of 13, 14, 15-year-olds committing suicide for what we would consider ridiculous reasons.
Right.
But I guarantee their friends know they've got problems. Their friends know they're cutting themselves. Their friends know, their social media posts likely reflect that in some ways. And this would also be a side benefit, is if those things were brought to your attention or brought to the program's attention, then those things could also be handled, hopefully, with a mental health referral or counseling or whatever it takes. But the goal of this is not to immediately bring in law enforcement because somebody posted something strange on Facebook. That's the farthest thing from it. And that's why a longitudinal look at their activity is beneficial, because one strange out of the park quirky post probably wouldn't make the radar, because you're looking at these students potentially over several years, and you're not looking at every student. You're looking at students that have been brought to your attention for aberrant behavior or aberrant posts, to watch them over time. If they're just posting a quirky post every now and then, who cares? That's okay. They're teenagers. They're going to do stupid stuff. But you look for the progression of a problem. You look for triggering behaviors. You look for something of a sign of an imminent threat. That's when you take action. That's when you bring in law enforcement. That's when kind of the actual threat assessment and mitigation part of the program kicks in.
Right.
And in that part of the program, when you've identified a credible threat, then you basically would form a committee of school individuals, law enforcement, mental health people, to deal with the problem holistically. In other words, let's not just look at one avenue. Let's not just say, let's find any possible criminal misconduct they've performed and put them in handcuffs. Yeah. Let's bring everybody together and see what's best for the community, what's the most applicable thing. Because honestly, if you take a problem and sit it in front of a cop, what's he going to think?
I don't know.
He's going to think, what charges can I get out of this?
Yeah.
Hopefully not shoot him. He's going to think, what charges can I get out of this? How can I arrest this person? Right. And that doesn't mean the officer is not smart, but that's what we're trained. We're trained to focus on our our bailiwick. Yes. What is our focus? And so you don't want to always throw a hammer when what a puffball would do. So by bringing all the different people who are the potential avenues for diversion together, I believe it would make a better situation and have a better outcome overall. And you only bring in the heavy guns, you only bring in the armed guys with handcuffs when you absolutely need to.
Now, John, you've provided this infographic from Intrepid Investigations, your company. Can you explain this to us?
Yes, absolutely. My company, we didn't necessarily pioneer it, but helped develop what we call the hybrid investigation approach to investigating. And this developed over several years with my work in private industry. And what it basically is most of the time in investigations, and that's honestly including police investigations, most of investigations you have your traditional investigation. You're talking to people, collecting paper documents, doing surveillance, doing undercover work. That traditional investigation is run at one time, and then somewhere along the line of that traditional investigation, the digital investigation begins. And by digital investigation, I mean like forensically analyzing cell phones or laptop computers. And because of the way that both law enforcement and private industry generally work, those two investigations are run at two different times. With law enforcement, the problem is most of the time their forensic labs are backed up terribly with information. And so it can take months, sometimes multiple months. to get information back on a digital source that's been submitted for evidence. On the private side, it's just because the two things don't necessarily come together in an attorney's mind if they're hiring a private investigator. So they hire the traditional investigator to do normal gumshoe work, and then at some point they realize they've got digital evidence, and so then they go out and hire a digital investigative firm to do the digital investigation. Well, under the hybrid investigation model, we run those two investigations concurrently. And not only, I mean, it saves money and saves time, yes, but the most important part of a hybrid investigation is that a traditional investigator who is savvy to digital evidence will pick up on digital evidence very quickly and then hand it over to the digital evidence technicians to do their work. And a digital evidence technician who is savvy to traditional investigative methods can feed information back to the traditional investigator. So what you end up having is a synergy between a traditional investigation and a digital investigation, feeding each other information, and in the end you get a much more complete investigation for less money and faster, and it's actually usually turns up much more relevant evidence. And
yeah, that makes sense. That sounds like a lot of what we've heard in other fields as well, where there's not necessarily a connection between all the components that could benefit from being connected. I think a lot of people watching right now have got to feel like some of the things that you're saying are a bit, you know, we've heard about Palantir, of course, and all of the move towards facial recognition and all of this, you know, digital analysis of everything that we do. There's this article here from earlier today talking about how Amazon urged not to sell a facial recognition tool to police. Amazon.com obviously provides cloud data services to the CIA, or they did for many years. We've heard a lot about Peter Thiel's company Palantir that uses social media accounts and, you know, everything from people's online presence to sort of cull information about them and use that in these sort of preemptive investigations. I mean, again, this is a challenge for law enforcement because, of course, the primary goal is to stop large numbers of students and innocent civilians from being killed by crazy people or terrorists or whoever it is that's doing these sorts of things. But at the same time, it's a very delicate balance between you know, preserving the privacy that we all basically don't have anymore and going after these people. So I'm not sure how to solve that.
I don't know either. I can tell you personally, things like, you know, widespread use of facial recognition software by the police makes me sick to my stomach, but I don't know how to fix it. That I don't know. I mean, it would take trying to get our lawmakers to increase our you know, personal privacy protection,
right.
which thus far seems like it's that never seems to come up. They always want to get more information. So,
right. And in the digital world, we know malicious actors can hack into everything. We're all carrying around an extremely powerful computer with us essentially every day. We've got our contacts in there, our text messages, our emails, everybody's most personal information is with them at all times. And pretty much, you know, anyone who can access a Wi-Fi router, we've heard from WikiLeaks with Vault 7, and I mean, that's, you know, 2-year-old, 3-year-old and older technology. Who knows to what extent? We've seen people on this program hack into my Skype messages and publicly display my Skype email messages. I was receiving phone calls from phone numbers of people that I know just the other day that maybe they were initiated by those people, but I don't know. It's so confusing for the average person to preserve their privacy in this digital world. Let me ask you this, John. Has your system, is there a concise name for this system?
Not yet. It's like I said, it's just in its infancy, and I'm, like I said, I'm not fully marketing it yet. I've got this idea, and it's reached kind of a maturity level where I'm really feel comfortable talking about it openly. But it's not packaged, you know, for full consumption yet, but it's something that I think is important and could make a big difference. And,
Yeah.
and while yes, I'm in business and yes, I'm a capitalist, this hits me in the heart. I mean, I've got a school age son, and my wife's a teacher, so this means something to me, and I think that this could make a real difference, because once the guy is heading toward the school with a gun,
then it's too late.
It's too late at that point.
Right.
And so I want to take the step of coming up with a way to pull back from that. That needs to be a necessary part of an overall security program for the school.
Absolutely.
But from my viewpoint, if it gets to the point where you've got to enact that exigent threat program at the school, where you're locking it down and the police are on their way, and if it gets to that point, in my world, the system has already failed. It's already a failure at that point.
And of course, this has got to be at the forefront of every parent's mind when their child goes to high school. It's like, it's more likely, I think, I would be interested to see the statistics on this, but it would seem like, I remember when I was in high school, they'd have fire drills, but it seems more likely that a student would be injured by a shooting than a fire at a school.
I believe so, and then, schools do have lockdown drills now. So I mean, it's reality. When thinking back, I'm 45. Mm-hmm. When I was in elementary school at a show and tell, I brought my dad's black powder rifle to school.
Wow.
For show and tell, and nobody batted an eye.
Well, it was Texas.
Well, I think it was also just the time period.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look back to my parents' generation, most high schools had rifle clubs where they actually brought their rifles to school. So to me, the problem isn't, and once again, maybe I'm getting political, but I don't see the problem is not the firearms. It's a problem of mental health and of the heart of our generation. And we can argue for hours about what's caused that change, but nobody can argue that the change has occurred. And so now we have to deal with, what do we do now? How do we put the genie back in the bottle if it's possible?
Yeah.
And if it's not possible, then we should take all necessary steps, all reasonable and necessary steps, to avert the problem before it becomes a violent situation. And so that's kind of where my concept with the threat monitoring program and the mitigation program kind of come into that realm. Is let's step back and handle these issues before they pick the gun up and start heading toward the school.
And so, John, will Intrepid Investigations be deploying this system anywhere, perhaps in Texas first? Have you been contacted by any high schools or public schools yet?
I haven't yet, but like I said, I'm just kind of starting to form up the marketing program for the program. I think initially I'll market it in Texas, and we'll see how it goes. And like I said, I really want there to be change. Arguing about the politics of guns is not going to solve this problem. That genie is firmly out of the bottle, and for one reason or another, it's never going to get back in. We are a gun culture, and we need to come to grips with that fact and solve what the real issue is. You can kill people with a hammer or a knife, or run over them in a car, like we've seen so many times with ISIS attacks in other countries or in our country. So you've got to deal with the real issue. The issue isn't the car. The issue isn't the knife. The issue isn't the gun. The issue is the motive and the mindset behind it. And so my program tries to handle the mindset before they ever pick up that gun.
Yes, and that aspect of it seems very important. It is rather striking how whenever these incidents occur, there always seems to be a speech ready from some left-wing politician, whether it's Hillary Clinton or some other individual who comes out talking about they want to ban bump stocks, they want to ban AR-15s, they want to ban things, and it just I
want to quote, I think it's Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And so I think for those in the political sphere, they never let a crisis go to waste. And so it's expected now for these speeches and the marches and the protests that go hand in hand. Now, I will say it is kind of interesting that in the shooting here in Santa Fe, the coverage has been rather scant. I mean, other than the day or the day after, the
Right.
news coverage wasn't nearly what it was at Parkland. And putting on my conspiracy hat,
Yeah.
I look at that and think, well, this shooter had communist iconography on his jacket, and Satanist iconography on his Facebook page, and I think it's not too much of a stretch to say he probably came from the left side of the political sphere, given his age, for whatever that means.
Right.
And so I don't think they saw it as politically expedient to trot everybody out, as much as say Parkland with David Hogg and the associated characters that were rolled out for that issue. So,
Right.
Like it or not, these situations are political. So, to me, as what I consider a typical American, you just put your filter on. You know that the certain people are going to come out and make political hay whenever they can, and you ignore it as best you can.
Right. Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring it up, that he's got this satanic imagery and he's got this communist imagery. I mean, I wonder to what extent a 17-year-old is politicized, but he's definitely, I mean, he's got a peace symbol on the hat. This is apparently a bisexual pride logo. I mean, these things seem not to necessarily be connected. I mean, Satanism and the Soviet Union and gay pride.
Well, I mean, one of the things is one of the things on his jacket's an iron cross, which is a Nazi symbol.
Right. Seems like a confused kid.
Well, Nazis and communists hate each other.
Right.
I think both Nazis and communists hate homosexuals.
Right.
So I mean, I'm not going to be saying anything crazy here. He obviously was a very confused and troubled individual, or he's still a confused and troubled individual.
Right.
My thing is, we were getting these pictures, of his strange behavior within an hour or two of the shooting, maybe
Right.
3 hours of the shooting. So if there was a setting or a program set up to where, as these weird things appeared on his Facebook page, some of his friends may take a minute and submit that and say, hey, this is just kind of weird. Saw this on this dude's Facebook. And,
Yeah.
the thing about all this information is that this is all open source information. We're not using any proprietary databases, to get information. So if someone was submitting information and I, as the investigator, were following up on this stuff, I'd be looking at stuff that he's posted publicly. So I'm not delving into his private life. I'm just delving into what he's publicly put out there.
Fair enough.
And so just looking at his Facebook, you may go, that's kind of strange. But when you look at his Facebook and his Snapchat and his Instagram, and you start putting all these things together, that's when you can form a full picture of a potential threat to engage things like school counselors or the mental health process. So we're not playing Big Brother. It's just kind of like, whatever you put publicly on Facebook, whoever has access to it, if it's open to be looked at, and that's what we would be doing, is just looking at stuff they're posting publicly. And
Right.
I guess fortunately for the program is that teenagers are usually pretty liberal about what they post publicly, crazy or not. So that's another reason I'm not worried about the Big Brother aspect, because we're not using anything proprietary. We're just
Right.
using stuff that they're freely passing out to the public.
John, Periscope is telling me that innovative mental health exists. Innovative mental health is proven effective but not accessible to most. Do you know what that is, innovative mental health?
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, going down the kind of the mental health route, it's no surprise to anybody that the public mental health sector is a mess. I have a disabled daughter who has mental issues, or some of her issues at times. So I know firsthand that what a mess the public mental health sector is. So
Wow.
This is not a singular problem. This is a systemic problem. And honestly, this is a systemic problem that extends beyond school shootings. large bureaucracy, government bureaucracy, is inefficient at best. And so bringing in a private sector company, to me, is a way to mitigate some of the issues with the stagnation and inefficiencies that the government providing things causes. So you're not going to fix government overnight, but what you can do is do your best to put the different pieces of government together in the most effective platform possible, to hopefully solve a problem. And maybe this program could be to get other people thinking, to fix other issues that we have with the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of government in general.
It's a complex problem, and I'm glad we've got experienced people like you working on solutions. People who want to follow John can find him on Twitter. He is Lawdog, LAWDOG_emeritus, and you can find him on Twitter. His company, of course, is called Intrepid Investigations, and John has developed a system to basically conduct threat assessment and mitigation in an area of school violence, and that's definitely an area that concerns us all. John, what else can we say to the people viewing right now? How can they, if people are interested in introducing your system, let's say to their local high school or even a college, or where do you see this system going most?
As I see it, mainly at the high school level, but there's nothing that would preclude it from being rolled out in colleges. But if people are interested,
for large companies,
or honestly, or the workplace.
At one point, this started out as going postal, but the post office is relatively clean at this point.
Yeah, going postal is so passé.
That's right.
But no, if anybody wants more information, or if they want to pass my information off to their school district, they can go to my website, or they can email me, contact@intrepid-investigations.com, or john.shirley@intrepid-investigations.com. My phone number is on the website. They can reach out to me, and hopefully in the next few weeks to a month or so, I'll have a dedicated page on my website for this program when I'm finally ready to fully market it. But I'm ready at any time to roll it out. It's at a point where I could roll it out tomorrow if I needed to.
Right.
I just need to get the word out, because I think a lot of good ideas never develop fruit because the word just doesn't get out. So I'm going to concentrate on marketing and getting it out, because I want to make a change. I want the school shootings to stop, and I want to do it in such a way that we can necessarily avoid always bringing in law enforcement, because law enforcement generally doesn't solve problems so that there's a win-win. A lot of times there's a win-lose. And so if you can solve it in advance of having to bring the handcuffs or bring the guys with guns and bulletproof vests, then that's where you can really get a win-win situation.
We've got a lot of comments coming from the viewers now. People want to know about dress codes. Do you think any of the old school methods are maybe effective at preventing some of this stuff?
Personally, I hate dress codes, but maybe that's because I spent 20 years in and out of a uniform. But I think what we need to do is encourage our school district to innovate and be willing to try different things. And if that's trying uniforms, that's trying uniforms. If it's trying, different ways of educating, I know there's some arguments for educating boys and girls separately. I believe in innovation in all government aspects, but in the schools as well. So, I don't know necessarily if uniforms would really solve the problem or part of the problem, but you know what? I think it's, at this point, anything reasonable is worth a try. So.
And as a former law enforcement officer, how do you feel about things? You spoke about hardening the schools, arming teachers, metal detectors. What do you think about that? Does it not put the students in a more militarized mindset?
It's repugnant. Let me couch this. I'm a full proponent of the Second Amendment, okay? But the idea that it's necessary to arm our teachers is repugnant to me. I agree it's probably necessary, but it's distasteful. Same with metal detectors. I think it's horrible. I hate going through metal detectors at the airport. I don't particularly like being patted down by the TSA. But security at some level is necessary. Not saying what the TSA does is fully necessary.
Right.
And not saying that I necessarily want them to install metal detectors in schools, but something has to be done. Now, that doesn't give an excuse to bring in Big Brother like we were talking about earlier, but what I will say is, why not we take a chance on a program like mine that could avert the necessity of having the metal detectors and the armed teachers.
Right.
To me, you're putting a Band-Aid on the problem when you're arming your teachers and you're putting up metal detectors, because once again, once it gets to that point, once the guns are pulled and once the bullets start going off, you're still going to have casualties, probably, even in the best of training situations. So I think it's smarter to step back and try to solve it before that.
Right.
So while I fully support hardening the schools, I don't like metal detectors. While I fully support hardening the schools, there's another way. There's a better way. And then hopefully that we can actually start attacking the problem of the heart and the mental health issues that our students have. And I'm not near qualified to even start attacking that issue. But to me, if we got something in place that bought us some time, so we weren't having a school shooting every month, every other month, or even twice a year, if we bought us some time, then maybe we could concentrate and figure out on what the root of the problem is that's causing students to do things that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago.
Well, Gen 2020 on Periscope is saying that the size of the schools and the number of students versus the amount of oversight could be playing some role. Do you feel that's...
Absolutely. My wife used to teach in a school district where they had one school that had like over 5,000 students in one school. And I was talking with somebody just the other day who was going to a school where there were 10,000 students in one high school. You're talking a city. You're talking something the size of a city being run by a handful of assistant principals and a few administrators and some teachers. And I think that is part of the problem. I do agree that is part of the problem. I think getting away from these mega schools would be a good step. I don't think it's going to solve it completely because of the place we're at as a society, but I definitely think that the mega schools that we have are part of the problem.
It's a very complex problem that requires really careful attention. My guest tonight has been John Shirley, and John is the principal at Intrepid Investigations. John's a retired homicide detective, formerly with the Houston Police Department, and he's a very experienced law enforcement professional who's been involved in a variety of investigations, homicide investigations, financial fraud investigations, and he's turned his attention now toward really one of the biggest problems facing our country and our society in general, which is school shootings and school violence. John, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Is there anything you want to share before we wrap it up?
No, Jason, I think I said all I needed to say, but thank you for having me. I appreciate getting to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate having you on, and we'll look to you in the future to find out what's going on with Intrepid Investigations and this program for threat assessment and mitigation of school violence. I'd be interested in maybe having you involved in a conversation with Ole Damagard or some of the people that we speak to that look at this issue from alternative viewpoints, so we can maybe look forward to that in the future. Thank you again, John, for joining us tonight, and enjoy your evening there in Texas. I want to thank everyone for watching and remind everyone that they can get in touch with John on Twitter and through his website. But of course, please remember that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored resource, and if people like the information that they're seeing, if you're watching the show regularly, please consider going to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and becoming a monthly sponsor, or making a one-time sponsorship payment at paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. Thank you again, John. Thanks everyone for watching. I will see you tomorrow.